Here to Lester Holt and this development from the Supreme Court.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air with breaking news from the Supreme Court about former President Donald Trump. The court just said they are taking up Mr. Trump's request to hear whether or not he is immune from prosecution. This will temporarily stop the federal election interference case against him from going to trial. It comes after an appeals court in Washington rejected Mr. Trump's broad claim of immunity from criminal charges, specifically for his actions leading up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett is with me. Laura, walk us through what this ruling means.
Okay, so let's talk about how we got here, Lester. The former president had tried to go to the Supreme Court to ask for a pause, to slow everything down so that this election interference case, the one in D.C., about the steps that he took leading up to January 6th, I should say, could be completely paused. He didn't want that D.C. Circuit decision to go into effect, which said that he was not immune from prosecution. Instead, the court did not do exactly what the former president wanted. He wanted a complete pause. Instead, they've decided to grab the issue for themselves and agree to hear the case on an expedited basis. Now, they're going to hear it on April 22nd. You might not say that that's particularly fast, but for the Supreme Court, that is fast. And this is what the special counsel, Jack Smith, had wanted. Knowing that this issue was sort of looming out there, he wanted the high court to rule to give a definitive answer so that you wouldn't have a situation where you would go all the way through trial and one court would say he is immune and one court would say he's not immune. They wanted the Supreme Court to rule on it right away because it's an issue that could make or break their case.
But does this bind the court, however, to once they begin hearing this case, to make a decision within a finite period of time?
No. Then at that point, they can make a decision whenever they want. I would imagine they'll still expedite it and they'll rule relatively quickly, but they are not under any time frame whatsoever. They can take as long as they want. They could issue it in the summertime. And so that's the reason. But for Mr. Trump, in some ways, this is a win because it slows things down. Remember, this trial was set to begin in March. That's not nearly going to be a possibility. The special counsel had hoped that the Supreme Court would take it up even faster and perhaps resolve it because, of course, the special counsel needs this resolved. His job depends on this being resolved.
Would this decision by the court, when they make it apply beyond just this one, beyond the January 6th case?
Potentially, and I think that might be why the Supreme Court is taking it up in this way. He has raised the issue of being immune, not only in this case in Washington, D.C., but also in Florida and in New York, and it could keep coming up. If the Supreme Court hadn't resolved it and taken the issue up on the merits itself, he could keep raising this issue in a variety of different contexts. And so now we'll have a final answer.
All right, let me go to Garrett Haake right now on Capitol Hill. Garrett, what does this mean for the former president politically and as he faces these myriad of cases?
Well, Lester, I've asked the campaign for comment here, and I'm refreshing the former president's social media page because I expect he'll give it, and I expect that the campaign will view this as a huge win, really on two fronts. One, as Laura was just describing, the delay that this will cause. Donald Trump, on the legal and political front, have felt that the longer they can push out any of these trials on any of the charges he faces, the better it is for him legally and the better that is for him politically. Purely in a political sense, Donald Trump has made the idea that he is somehow a target of either the DOJ or Democratic prosecutors in blue states into a core message of his 2024 campaign. And so I think the idea here that he is seen as fighting back against Jack Smith, whom he has tried to turn into a villain on the right, and that he'll get an opportunity, his lawyers will get an opportunity to argue this case in front of a Supreme Court that has 3 justices he helped seat, will fit, at least in the near term, the political messaging that he has tried to put all around all of this. Obviously, if the court ultimately rules against him, that's another matter. But in the short term, and that's frankly largely how Donald Trump and his political team assess these things, kind of one crisis followed by the next. They try to knock them down as they come up in front of them. In the short term, it's not only a legal win to have this hearing and to delay the start of the trial, it's a rhetorical and a political win for the way that he likes to talk about all of the cases that are pending against him.
All right. And Laura, as we look at this it's what, a one-page long memo. I'll use the term memo. There's no legal term for it. But does this apply at all to the case that's coming forward later in March, the state case in New York?
On its face, it shouldn't, but it might depend on exactly how the contours of the Supreme Court decision ultimately gets resolved. They say exactly what they're looking at. They define the question, whether and if so, to what extent does a former president enjoy presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for conduct alleged to involve official acts during his tenure in office. Now, of course, the thing that he's accused of in the hush money case in New York is falsifying his business records. He's accused of doing that while in the White House. So to the extent that he's arguing that he's immune in that case as well, this could potentially come into play. The federal case that we talk about so much, the classified documents case, that has to do with acts that happened once he was no longer in the White House. But he has, again, raised the issue of immunity, the idea that he conceived of the idea while he was still president. So I think this decision could have major bearing, not just in the D.C. case, but on other cases as well.
All right, let me turn to Kristen Welker, moderator of Meet the Press. She joins me now. Kristen, as they say, the plot thickens.
Well, Lester, that's right. And look at how these court and legal twists and turns have played for former President Trump so far. As Garrett was saying, it has only helped him politically because he is painting himself and has tried to paint himself as the victim of political persecution. That has helped him to energize his base. So from the moment that the first indictment came down, Lester, his poll numbers have only gone up. We've seen that with each new indictment. We've seen that with each new court case. And now this is yet another argument which has helped him energize his supporters. Now he has some wins under his belt in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, in Michigan overnight. So he's just continuing this steady march to the nomination. And it seems at this point almost all but inevitable, also inevitable, if this court case is pushed in the direction that we think it will be, it could well happen, Lester, after former President Trump has gotten all of the delegates that he would officially need to be determined to be the nominee. So we'll have to see. Of course, that remains to be seen. But again, the timing of this is what is significant, because you could have a scenario where this court case begins after he has been determined to be the GOP nominee, and this decision could come down after that.
And Kristen, you voiced the question that's been on our minds throughout the beginning of this in terms of timing. And Laura, as we look at that, do we know how that would work if these cases come to trial somewhere after the nomination?
All of this is uncharted territory, Lester. We've never seen the Republican frontrunner facing a criminal trial as we have. And remember, there's nothing that stops him from running for president. There's nothing that stops him from being president, even if he were to ultimately be convicted in any of these cases. But certainly, if the Supreme Court finds that he's immune and cannot be prosecuted, it would be an enormous blow to the special counsel's case. The entire case would go away completely if he's immune.
And I should ask you, the fact that the court has ruled in this way and says they're going to take up the case, is that a breadcrumb as to which way they may be leaning, or are they simply saying we're just going to do this?
They say explicitly, knowing that you would ask that they're not weighing in one way or another on the merits. I think what it does signal is the gravity of the issue, and them realizing, the justices realizing that they as the high court have to resolve this once and for all.
All right, Ken Delaney is NBC's justice and intelligence correspondent. Ken, to that question, I know there was a lot of speculation among legal scholars that the court would not want to take this, would just let this pass and let the appeals court ruling stand.
You're absolutely right, Lester. As a matter of fact, I was at an event this morning with a lot of current and former Justice Department officials and other legal experts, and that seemed to be the consensus. They didn't believe that the Supreme Court would take this case. They thought the appeals court ruling would win the day. That's obviously not what has happened here, and as others have said, this will substantially delay the potential for this case to go to trial. And it starts to run into Justice Department policy, remember, about not influencing an election. The DOJ policy, and it's just a policy, it's not a law, suggests that the Justice Department shouldn't take actions within 30 or 60 days, it's not set in stone, around an election that would tend to influence the election. So it's an open question here whether that policy would apply in this case when it's already been indicted. So it's not like a new thing that they would be rolling out, but it's really uncharted territory. And then another question would be, could they take this to trial after the election if Mr. Trump is elected president but not yet inaugurated? So many new questions here arising in this uncharted moment.
Yeah, Ken, thank you. Let me bring in NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. He's with us. Chuck, to this idea of uncharted territory, it seems like it needs to be charted very quickly because this opens up a lot of cans of worms.
Well, it does. And look, the timing of this trial, of the Jack Smith trial, I mean, when you look at the various legal issues that Donald Trump has, politically, the only one that might move votes is the Jack Smith trial. We've already seen, I'm very skeptical, the Alvin Bragg, what's happening in New York City will move voters no matter what it is. We've seen the E. Jean Carroll civil verdicts have not moved poll numbers or not had any political impact on Trump. I think the one that could is the Jack Smith trial, and here's why. Because of all the parade of notables who could be testifying against Donald Trump, including his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, his former attorney general, Bill Barr, perhaps his former defense secretary, Mark Esper, perhaps even the former vice president, Mike Pence, right? That is a much different, and if this is happening in the summer, before the convention, you can see the political impact. But if this doesn't happen by November, well, I think it is one huge impediment being removed from Donald Trump's path to the White House, because I don't know if he can politically survive the public airing that will come from this Jack Smith trial, which is why he's fighting so hard to get this, to delay this trial as long or perhaps even get rid of it.
All right, let me bring in NBC legal analyst Catherine Christian. Catherine, the question of how this will be spun is an open one. We'll see that play out likely in the next few minutes or hours. But is there a winner here in terms of legally?
Well, the winner obviously is Donald Trump, because we have delay there. This ensures that this trial will not happen before Election Day. I mean, Judge Chutkan, if the Supreme Court comes with a decision at the end of September and the decision is Donald Trump doesn't have immunity, she'll try to move heaven and earth to get it done before Election Day. But this pretty much is sort of a hold. This case, the January 6th election interference case, is not going to be tried before Election Day.
All right. And Laura, where do you think the court wants to take this up? Does it feel like the gravity of this question has to be settled one way or the other?
These are questions that have never been answered before, Lester. And we start with Judge Chutkan saying presidents are not kings. And that's sort of the fundamental question that they're wrestling with. And I think it's one that the court knows that it has to resolve. But to, Catherine's point and so many others on your panel, the timing here is really everything. And even if the Supreme Court, let's say they came back within a week with a decision like this, Mr. Trump still gets the benefit of all this time that certainly things have been on hold. Remember, this case has essentially been frozen in time since the first week of December. And so now we're encroaching into March. He gets the benefit of all of that. And he nearly 3 months, really, to work all of this out. So even if they came back, say, in April, the timing here really works in his favor.
All right, Laura Jarrett, thank you. That concludes this NBC News special report. We'll have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com. And I'll see you shortly here for NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for watching, and good day, everyone.